Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a time when even the slightest wrinkle in a napkin could determine your career trajectory, and possibly your exile. You're standing just outside the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, where the sun glints off gold-framed everything, and servants wear silk stockings that cost more than most people's homes. You're not a noble. You're not even a guest. No, tonight you're something better, an insider. A silent observer. One of the countless eyes that sees what happens behind Louis XIV's elaborate performances. The king is hungry. And when the Sun King gets hungry, dozens of people leap into action, not to cook, that's someone else, and not even to serve, different again. No, this crowd gathers to witness. To witness the sacred ritual of dining, and the absurdly detailed drama that surrounds it. There's a hush as Louis sits. A gold fork. A silver spoon. A porcelain plate painted with mythological scenes he probably never looked at. You, however, are watching something far less shiny, a napkin. White linen, freshly pressed, folded just so. It is ceremoniously placed at the king's left. And you already know, because you've read the secret script, that this napkin is not just for dabbing sauces. It's a battlefield. This napkin, once used, becomes property of someone. But who? That's where things get delicate. Only a few chosen attendants are allowed to approach. The Grand Chamberlain stands close, but he's not touching it. The Premier Valet de Chambre eyes it. A young servant, barely old enough to shave, edges forward, then freezes. Is it too soon? You think of modern workplace politics, awkward promotions, that guy who always forgets to reply all, and it all seems quaint next to this. These men will maneuver for years just for the chance to carry a sweaty napkin to the royal laundry. And it's not just any sweat. It's king sweat. To touch it is to be part of something sacred. Or so they tell themselves. After all, this is a world where kings don't just reign, they perfume history with their preferences. You've seen people elbow one another for band t-shirts at a concert. This? Same energy, fancier lace. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Louis chews quietly. A servant flicks crumbs off the table with a small, fur-covered brush. But everyone's attention is on the napkin. It flutters slightly in a breeze. Did it just fall off his lap? No, false alarm. You exhale. The entire room's holding its breath. Eventually, the king dabs his lips. Once. Twice. He places the napkin on the table. That's the cue. But not your cue, heavens no. Only the designated valet may step forward. He does, trembling just a little. He picks it up as if retrieving a sacred relic, folds it once, neatly, and places it in a silver tray lined with velvet. You don't know whether to laugh or salute. Historians still argue whether this ritual had a coded purpose beyond ego maintenance. Perhaps it was meant to display the king's purity, or humility, or even his digestion. Others say it was just theater, Versailles style. But that napkin, creased, stained, human, will be the source of much bickering later. And yes, you'll be there for all of it. As the king rises, dozens of men rush to open doors, lift curtains, and silently clear the dishes. You linger a moment longer, watching that silver tray vanish down a hallway. Tomorrow morning, it will resurface in a ledger somewhere. Yes, there were actual napkin logs. You'll get to read one soon. For now, though, you're just getting started. 1,000 small rituals await. And trust me, you probably wouldn't survive 1 week in this linen-obsessed job without getting demoted to the chicken coop. You're still floating through the corridors of Versailles, but this time with purpose. You're chasing protocol. Not power, not prestige, just the right to fold a napkin without sparking a minor civil war. Versailles is not a palace. It's a machine. One with too many moving parts and not nearly enough oil. At every turn, someone is bowing to someone else who's secretly glaring at a third person for standing too close to a curtain. You pass a steward whose only job is to adjust the placement of footstools. You overhear a valet sighing about having been demoted from napkin handler to silver bowl bearer. It's a very real fall from grace. This is not hyperbole. There's an actual flowchart, handwritten, inked, and framed, explaining who is allowed to hand what to whom and when. You're not allowed to see it, of course. It's hidden behind a cabinet near the Dauphin's sitting room. But you've heard the whispers. The rules? They're ridiculous. Only a gentleman of noble birth may present the king with his gloves. Only a man of appropriate bloodline may serve water. And napkins? Well, let's just say you need the right lineage, 3 witnesses, and an endorsement from the chief of linen folding affairs, which is a real title. You trail behind a young servant named Etienne. Poor kid looks like he's about to faint from the pressure. It's his first week in the king's dining chamber, and he's been assigned backup napkin observation. That means standing 10 paces behind the primary valet and watching the cloth's movement with the intensity of a hawk. If the napkin falls, he's to signal with a discreet cough. If it's left on the plate, he notes the angle, corner draped downward. That's the "I'm mildly displeased" signal. Neatly folded and set atop the spoon. That means good meal, but too much garlic. Historians still argue whether these gestures were codified or invented by bored nobles who had run out of dueling partners. Some believe that the napkin language was just imagined later by eager memoir writers. But others insist it was as real as the powdered wigs and perfumed socks. What's certain is that no movement at Versailles happens without intention. And every act, especially ones involving anything that touched the royal lips, is shadowed by politics. Even if that act is simply blotting gravy from a chin. You find your way into the linen chamber. It's not large, but it is immaculate. Rows of folded napkins lie in wooden trays, each labeled with initials, dates, and notes. Used at March 9th duck feast, visible grease, clove-scented. Slight wine stain, disposed of with ceremony. A woman in a starched apron smooths a napkin for the 4th time. Her fingers tremble. She's heard rumors, someone folded a serviette the wrong way last week and hasn't been seen since. He's actually just polishing candlesticks in the cellar, but the fear remains. You help stack freshly pressed linens. Carefully. There's a correct order, those to be used at formal court dinners go in the top drawer, those for light breakfast with minor dukes go lower. Each stack rests between lavender sachets, part for scent, part for insect prevention, part for mystery. You glance at a paper pinned to the cabinet door. It's a napkin rotation schedule. The king likes variety. One day, damask with fleur-de-lis. The next, monogrammed with tiny suns. The schedule is approved weekly by 3 separate departments. And heaven help you if the wrong one is used. One footman was nearly exiled for handing the king a napkin embossed with lilies on the Queen Mother's birthday. Apparently, that pattern was associated with her 3rd miscarriage. You didn't even know napkin designs had emotional baggage. Now you do. You pause. It's dizzying, all these rules and ranks and rhythms. But you're starting to see the system. Or at least feel its pulse. Like a choreographed ballet, slow, repetitive, slightly absurd, and filled with unspoken tension. And just when you think it couldn't possibly get more complicated, Etienne returns, pale as chalk. He speaks in a whisper. The king asked for a second napkin. You look at the linen mistress. She gasps. A second napkin wasn't in the script. This is going to change everything. A second napkin? That's like asking for a second sunrise. No one really knows what to do. You're standing frozen in the doorway of the linen room, and the entire mood has shifted from gentle dusting to full-on emergency. The linen mistress grabs a silver bell and gives it 2 sharp shakes. A valet appears almost instantly, like a ghost in ruffled cuffs. His Majesty asked for another one, the valet repeats, voice trembling like fine china. Etienne nods. He just said, another, if you please. Gasps. Actual gasps. You don't know whether to laugh or scream. Because while the rest of the world might think of napkins as utilitarian, use it, lose it, wipe the ketchup and move on, here in Versailles, it's a matter of courtly geometry. Every napkin is selected in accordance with the meal, the guests, the season, and sometimes the current mood of the Dauphin's dog. And now, an unplanned second napkin has broken protocol. There is no line in the script for this. No footnote in the linen rotation book. No signed authorization for a bonus cloth. It's culinary heresy. Still, the king did ask. You're swept along with a flurry of urgent whispers and half-running servants. The linen mistress selects a napkin at random, then freezes. No. Not that one, she says, voice taut. It was meant for the Venetian ambassador's dessert course tomorrow. She selects another. Rejects it. A third. This one smells faintly of cloves. What if he's tired of cloves today? This goes on for what feels like an hour but is really 3 minutes. Finally, a valet dares to take action. He chooses one with simple embroidery, white on white, nothing too aggressive. It is delivered with all the solemnity of a royal pardon. You follow as it's carried down the marble corridor, past velvet drapes and oil portraits of disapproving ancestors. You half expect lightning to strike. The king accepts it with a small nod. And now the real chaos begins. You don't know this yet, but the first napkin, the original Napkin 1, will now be under intense scrutiny. The assumption will be, something was wrong with it. Too damp. Poorly folded. Slightly stained. This is Versailles, where everything is an implication, and even napkins have enemies. Historians still argue whether Louis XIV genuinely needed a second napkin that day, or whether he was testing the alertness of his staff. Some speculate it was a passive-aggressive signal to the Comte de Saint-Jean, who had recently offended the king's barber by sitting too close at breakfast. Others believe it was just hot, and Louis had spilled sauce. But whatever the reason, the effect is the same. A meeting is called that evening, a quiet one, behind closed doors. Attendants, 4 senior valets, the chief of napkin presentation, 1 linen keeper, and a very tired scribe. They pore over the sequence of events like generals after a failed campaign. You're there, watching it all from behind a heavy curtain, breathing in the scent of starch and political fear. Was the first napkin properly chilled before use? One voice demands. It was aired but not chilled, another admits, face reddening. There was no instruction to chill, snaps a third. Accusations fly. One valet weeps quietly into his sleeve. In the end, no one is punished, but the message is clear: napkin errors, however small, will not be tolerated again. The next day, 3 additional napkin scenarios are added to the official playbook. One includes protocol for, if the king requests a third napkin. Another involves evacuation procedures for unexpected gravy spills. A third suggests a rotating napkin inspection team. You're not sure if that last one's a joke. No one's laughing. And so, a new normal begins. Napkin handling becomes even more political. Valets begin whispering about the second napkin incident, in hushed tones, as if it were a military defeat. Some staff start referring to it only as N2. Meanwhile, poor Etienne is both praised and pitted. He's the boy who didn't hesitate. The one who dared to repeat the king's request. Some call him brave. Others think he overstepped. He walks the halls like a nervous deer in powdered shoes. You spot him one morning in the pantry, staring at a folded cloth as though it might explode. "Do you think," he asks you softly, "that napkins, remember?" You want to say no. But the truth is, you're not entirely sure anymore. You wake, or rather, drift further, into a scene of velvet chairs and murmuring nobles. The napkin incident has become lore, barely 2 days old and already retold like a fable. In Versailles, stories age quickly, like milk in the sun. And the tale of the second napkin now joins the canon of whispered legends, alongside the Duke who wore 2 wigs and the time someone laughed during pâté. The tension in the air isn't just about cloth anymore. It's about precedent. You're seated now in a discreet corner of the lesser dining salon, one used for the midday meal, attended by a constellation of lesser stars in the royal sky, viscounts, minor ministers, and one man whose only role is to taste the king's wine, but who insists on being addressed as Baron of the Bottle. Today, you're shadowing a man named Augustine. He's what's called a third-line napkin relay. Essentially, he's the guy who hands the napkin to the guy who hands it to the guy who gives it to the king. But make no mistake, this is not a job for the faint-hearted. Augustine carries himself like a man who folds cloth with honor. He irons without fear. He starches with passion. You follow him through a pre-meal ritual so detailed it might as well be a religious rite. First, the inspection. Each napkin is held up to the morning sun and scrutinized for wrinkles, shadows, imperfections. Then comes the breath test. He literally holds the napkin near his lips and exhales. It's supposed to simulate the king's breath, to ensure the fabric won't emit any suspicious odors under stress. Historians still argue whether this breath test was official protocol or simply a nervous tic passed down by anxious generations of linen men. Either way, it happens. Next, the folding. Now, you've folded napkins before. Maybe into a triangle. Maybe, on a good day, into a sort of lotus. But this? This is origami blessed by theology. The napkin must be folded into what Augustine calls the king's bloom, an intricate rose shape with precisely 6 spirals, meant to unfold elegantly when touched. He practices twice before doing the real one. It takes him 13 minutes. Anything less is treason, he jokes. But you're not entirely sure he's joking. You ask him what happened before Versailles, before Louis decided to build a whole new world around his own preferences. Augustine shrugs. The Chateau of Saint-Germain had napkins too. But they were simpler. Rougher. We were farmers with lace. He pauses. Here, though, here we are priests of the cloth. And just like that, it makes sense. You're not in a palace, not really. You're in a cathedral of rituals. The napkins aren't just napkins. They are symbols. Tokens of access, of status, of knowing the right folds and the right moments. Every servant in Versailles wants to get closer to the center. Closer to the king's breath, to the crumbs of authority, to the prestige that comes from simply being visible during a royal meal. Some serve soup. Some refill goblets. Others, like Augustine, touch the linen that touches the lips of the Sun King. It's practically holy. But there's risk in proximity. The closer you get to the sun, the more likely you'll be scorched by it. You spot another servant, Maurice, standing stiffly by a gilded doorway. His eyes are puffy. You later learn he was reprimanded for overfanning a napkin during pre-dinner preparations. Too theatrical, said the Duke of No One Remembers. Maurice had been hoping for a promotion to second-tier handkerchief steward. Now it's back to polishing spoons. The hierarchy is brutal. You either rise, or you fold, pun intended. By the end of the day, Augustine has completed his duties flawlessly. He receives a polite nod from the valet senior, which in Versailles terms is akin to a standing ovation. You trail behind him to the courtyard. He loosens his collar and sighs. Do you think the king even notices, you ask? He smiles, but it's not a happy one. I don't serve for him to notice, he says. I serve so that everyone else does. You begin to sense the rhythm of Versailles, not just its music or schedule, but its emotional tempo. And it's tense. Constantly. Like a string wound a little too tight. You'd think the king's dirty napkin would be a minor footnote in palace life, quickly forgotten like yesterday's duck pâté. But no. Here, small things expand. They echo. Today's assignment is deceptively simple: shadow the napkin watch. Yes, it's a real post. A rotating team of servants, tasked solely with monitoring the used napkin from breakfast until it is properly catalogued, scented, and burned, or, in rare cases, preserved. Wait. Preserved? Yes. Because you learn there's a whole drawer in the lower linen archive for notable napkins. Ones touched during treaties. Ones used the morning after famous speeches. There's even one from the time Louis sneezed during Lent and said, "Pardon," aloud, an uncharacteristic breach of silence so shocking they saved the cloth. Historians still argue whether these relics were meant as devotional items or just fuel for palace gossip. You suspect it's both. Anyway, back to today. The breakfast napkin, napkin #47A, is currently folded into a loose square, waiting on a velvet-lined tray in the linen chamber. It bears the faintest mark of raspberry preserve. A scandalously relaxed breakfast item, but the king is known to favor it with toast. Your job is to watch it. You and two others sit on a low bench and stare at the thing like it might sprout legs. One guard, Henri, leans in and murmurs, "You think the spot looks intentional?" His eyes are serious. Like a message? Message to whom, you whisper. To us. The silence that follows is oddly reverent. Because in Versailles, it's not what the napkin holds, it's how it holds it. A single stain, a smudge, a misfold, all of these can be interpreted as signals. The king himself is above speaking directly in many matters. It's said he once demoted a footman not by word or decree, but by choosing a different door to enter dinner. Napkins are no different. A reused one might mean forgiveness. A new one before the first is finished? That's rebuke. A napkin tossed, heaven forbid, could unravel 3 ducal alliances and cause a scandal in Navarre. So yes, the watch is a real thing. Not official, but real. Everyone pretends it's about maintaining hygiene and order, but it's mostly about reading tea leaves in linen folds. You're briefed on proper reaction protocol. If the napkin is touched again, note it. If it's moved, inform the valet. If it disappears, panic. Quietly. You're also told the worst possible thing that could happen is for a nobleman to attempt to claim the used napkin as a souvenir. It's happened. Once. The Count of Duras reportedly snuck one into his pocket after a royal hunting breakfast. It was discovered later in his library, framed. He claimed it was a joke. He was sent to Brittany for 6 months. But no one's laughing now. By mid-afternoon, a young page enters to retrieve napkin #47A. You rise in unison, almost like guards during a hostage exchange. The tray is passed. Everyone nods gravely. And then it's gone, headed to the linen archivist's desk for sorting. Will it be cleaned? Kept? Destroyed? You won't know. What you do know is this: the linen archivist, a sharp-eyed woman named Camille, has an expression like a hawk inspecting her eggs. She holds up the napkin with long silver tweezers. Frowns. Sniffs. Too sweet, she mutters. Too sweet? The king, you later hear, had likely consumed more preserve than usual, possibly a sign that he was feeling whimsical. Which, in turn, means the court can expect a slightly more relaxed atmosphere at supper. Two musicians are hastily called back from the edge of dismissal. A small party is allowed in the orangery. And all of this, all of it, is because of a napkin. You return to your room that night dazed. Not from exhaustion, but from the sheer mental gymnastics required to interpret royal cloth. The rest of the world writes letters. Here, the king wipes his mouth, and entire departments reorganize themselves in response. You begin the next day beneath the stairs near the grand staircase, an odd place to meet, but apparently perfect for discretion. Your guide today is Baptiste, an old hand in the linen game, with a face like a roasted chestnut and fingers permanently stiff from folding. He's not part of the napkin relay or the watch. No, Baptiste handles post-use processing. He's the man who deals with the aftermath of the king's meals, the dirty linen. You think the frontline boys get all the glory, he mutters, pushing open a small oak door. But let me tell you, the real danger lives down here. You follow him into the belly of the chateau, where the air smells faintly of starch, vinegar, and melancholy. Rows of hooks line the walls, each labeled with numbers and date stamps. Some hold garments, others hold napkins, stained, wrinkled, exhausted. Here, Baptiste points to a pile. These are from the treaty week. You can still see the beef glaze. You peer closer. He's not wrong. This room, dimly lit by one flickering lamp, is where the used napkins are triaged. Baptiste has a method, and woe unto anyone who questions it. Each napkin is first inspected for historical relevance. This means anything with an unusual stain, dramatic fold, or time of use deviation gets flagged for possible preservation. One, from last April, is labeled smudged during astronomer's visit. Another, wiped twice, possible intestinal comment. Historians still argue whether that second entry refers to the king's digestion or to a passing jab at the Duke of Orleans' recently published treatise on the human gut. Either way, the napkin became legend, and Baptiste keeps it in a velvet pouch with great reverence. He shows you how he washes the linen, explaining that not all napkins are treated equally. Some are gently hand-washed in chamomile water, others boiled in vinegar and wine. The real treasures? They're steamed over fresh lavender, then dried in open air near the Queen's former terrace. That spot gets just the right sun, he explains, as though describing where to bury sacred bones. You ask why the king's napkins aren't simply burned. Baptiste frowns deeply. You burn a royal napkin only if there's shame on it, he says. Or illness. You shiver a little, remembering the rumors of a liver complaint last autumn and the flurry of napkins suddenly missing from the archive. One servant, they say, tried to keep one for himself, to pray over it, or maybe sell it. No one's seen him since. I think he's in Marseille now, Baptiste mutters. Or under it. There's a kind of grim poetry to it all. These cloths that touch the most powerful lips in France, reduced to ragged ghosts in a damp cellar. Yet here they are, treated with more care than most nobles receive in death. One napkin has been folded into a crude flower and pinned to the wall. That's the April Fool's napkin, Baptiste says. He pretended to sneeze on purpose. Wiped nothing. But the gesture, pure theater. You start to understand. These servants aren't just wiping and washing. They're chronicling a reign, one stain at a time. The palace may have official historians, but Baptiste has the truer story, inked not in parchment but in sauce, grease, and royal spittle. By the end of your time in the basement, your clothes smell faintly of boiled vinegar, but your mind is alight. This isn't the underworld. It's a cathedral in its own right, a secret archive where every napkin is a whisper from the throne. You ask Baptiste if he ever gets tired of the work. He shakes his head. I sleep well, he says. But only after I've put the cloths to rest. You wake the next morning to the faint sound of bells, tinny, distant, and oddly rhythmic. It turns out to be the summons for a new category of duty, breakfast rotation in the Chambre du Roi. And today, you're on napkin handoff. Again. But this time, the stakes are higher. Because today, the king is expected to dine en petit comite, a smaller, more intimate setting where fewer servants are present, and every motion is more visible. Which means the napkin isn't just a utensil. It's a prop. A signal. A performance cue. You report to Claude, a valet de chambre with one silver eyebrow and a sneer so faint it's almost invisible. He hands you the napkin. Fresh. Folded. Warmed between two bricks wrapped in rabbit fur. Don't speak, Claude says. Just hand it. Palm side facing up. Fold must align with his right thumb. You blink. I'm not joking. You aren't sure whether to laugh or cry. As you wait behind the velvet partition, the sounds of clinking silver, murmured Latin, and the occasional croissant being murdered fill the chamber. You count to 6, Claude's signal, and emerge. The king doesn't look at you. His hand rises lazily, like a summer cloud lifting from a hillside. You place the napkin precisely. It lands. It settles. You exhale. But then, disaster. A gust from the open terrace window catches the far edge. The napkin flutters. Not dramatically. Just enough to fold inward on itself, obscuring the raspberry crest embossed into the cotton. Everyone freezes. The king pauses mid-sip. And then, casually, with a motion so smooth it might have been rehearsed, he refolds it with a single flick of his fingers. No words. No glance. Claude winces. You wait for someone to faint. The king resumes eating. Later, Claude pulls you aside and whispers, "You owe your life to that man's mercy." You're not sure if he's exaggerating. You return to your quarters to find a tiny note pinned to your cot. It reads, "Fold tighter next time." No name. No seal. Historians still argue whether the king used his napkin that day to signal annoyance or simply boredom. Some say that the brief flutter marked the beginning of a cooling period in relations with the Duchy of Savoy, who, coincidentally, were seated to his left. Another fringe theory suggests the king was experimenting with theatrical tension, testing how quickly his court would recover composure after a minor deviation. Because in Versailles, the line between politics and pantomime is so thin it may as well be stitched into the hem of a linen square. The rest of the day, you're placed on standby napkin detail, which sounds like a joke, but isn't. You hover in a hallway holding a backup cloth, just in case another gust of wind dares. While you wait, an older servant named Margot joins you. She's been in the palace since the days of Louis XIII and knows every corridor by scent. You think it's about the linen, she says, but it's never about the linen. It's about where power lands when silence falls. You ask what that means. She just smiles and walks off. Later that evening, you peek into the linen report's ledger, yes, there is one, and see today's entry, napkin 48A, wind touched. Recovered by king. No correction required. Record as anecdotal variance. You chuckle. Then stop. Because beneath it, in faint script, someone has added, "Review weatherproofing protocol for terrace breakfasts." You can't tell if it's satire or not. Maybe that's the point. By bedtime, your fingers are cramped from practicing the perfect fold, 9 creases, a subtle central dip, and a pinch at the top for hand anchoring. You drift to sleep wondering if you'll dream of flying napkins. You do. The next morning begins with an emergency. A napkin is missing. Not a common napkin, mind you, this was one of the Mark XX, the highly scrutinized, specially woven batch used only during foreign visits or feast days. These were tracked, counted, stitched with near-invisible gold thread, and documented in a leather-bound registry kept under lock and key. Now, napkin 14B is unaccounted for. You're woken before dawn by a footman with breath like cabbage and panic in his eyes. You're summoned, he whispers. Council of Linen. you're too groggy to laugh. Within the hour, you're in a low-ceilinged chamber near the tapestry repair wing. Around the long table sit some of the most powerful fabric-related minds in Versailles, head laundresses, 2 archivists, the Count of Seasonal Linens, and even Madame Florine, the woman who designed the current napkin protocol following the Great Embarrassment of 1674. It involved mustard and a Swedish ambassador. Let's not dwell. The meeting begins with silence. Not dramatic silence. Exhausted silence. Florine speaks first. Who last handled 14B? All heads turn to Gerard, a twitchy youth with the shoulders of a frightened cat. I did. It was placed on the king's side table after the fig tart course. And then? I believe, the marquise's lapdog may have. He doesn't finish. The chamber erupts, not in chaos, but in aggressive muttering. One archivist begins flipping pages furiously. Someone else hisses, "That dog again," under their breath. You're assigned to the search committee. What follows is not what you'd expect. No guards. No interrogation. Instead, you and a small team spend 6 hours gently rifling through potted plants, inspecting harpsichord pedals, and sniffing chair cushions for a trace of fig or the king's almond oil. Royal napkins are always scented, of course, to mask any unpleasant aromas. You don't find the napkin. But you do find something worse, a forgery. Hidden behind a decorative screen in the Dauphin's music room is a cloth pretending, poorly, to be 14B. Wrong weave, wrong hem, crest printed rather than stitched. A mockery. The room goes cold. Historians still debate whether this forgery was an act of satire, seduction, or sedition. Was someone trying to practice the fold for their own purposes? Was it part of an unofficial love letter system? Or perhaps a servant's attempt to curry favor with a rival noble? Madame Florine declares an alert of Category Blue, which hasn't been triggered since the soup spoon swap of 1669. All napkins are recalled for recounting. Meals are served without linen for 2 days, an embarrassment of such magnitude that several nobles develop handkerchief-based finger-dabbing rituals to fill the void. You, meanwhile, are given night duty, watching the royal linen room. You sit among the stacks, every fold and edge lined up like tiny sleeping soldiers. You begin to feel the weight of centuries pressing in. Somewhere near midnight, you hear a rustle. It's the dog. The marquise's lapdog, fluffy, pompous, and inexplicably clever, is trotting toward you with something in its mouth. Napkin 14B. Still damp. Slightly chewed. Smelling faintly of rosemary and shame. The dog drops it in your lap, gives you one disdainful blink, and waddles off. You don't know whether to laugh or report it. You choose both. The napkin is returned, noted as temporarily detained by external agent, and placed in the restoration pile for ceremonial cleansing. Later, your name appears in the footnotes of the linen log. Not in bold. But it's there. And for now, that's enough. The incident with the marquise's lapdog has elevated your standing in ways you didn't expect. You're not promoted, not exactly, but you're now considered napkin reliable, a term of respect whispered among the lower ranks with the same reverence normally reserved for someone who's managed to fold silk while hungover. Your next assignment is both an honor and a hazard, shadowing Monsieur Lefranc, the king's personal linen adjudicator. Lefranc is lean, silent, and dresses like a ghost. He appears in doorways, disappears behind curtains, and knows the entire palace by footstep acoustics. His primary role? Ensuring that the napkin theater of Versailles runs without error, especially during court rituals when the king dines in front of spectators, as part of his daily performance of power. Today, the dining ritual is for the birthday of the Dauphine. Though she is barely 12, the event is grand, with full protocol, musicians, powdered wigs, and 27 separate food deliveries. Lefranc's concern is with timing. The king's hand reaches for the napkin after the 4th spoonful of consommé. He whispers, If it is not already waiting, Cree-side north, someone loses a month's pay. You blink. Or a hand, in the old days, he adds, not blinking back. You follow Lefranc into the underhalls, where footmen rehearse napkin passes like dancers in a somber ballet. Each holds their cloth with the reverence of a relic. One folds his 3 times, unfolds, then refolds. Another mutters a short prayer. It's almost funny. Almost. But then Lefranc shows you the diagrams. Yes, there are diagrams. Rolled scrolls with drawings of hand placement, fold trajectory, fabric response under pressure. They resemble military stratagems or the instructions for assembling divine machinery. Some are annotated with cross breeze from gallery, emotional delay if queen present, or adjust for melancholia. You're assigned the 7th napkin, the one handed to the king for mouth dabbing before the pastry course. Your role is simple. Wait behind the left pillar. When the harpsichord hits its 5th note of Jardin d'Or, step forward with folded cloth, bow slightly, and make the pass. It's terrifying. And when the moment comes, harpsichord swelling, the king raising his brow, you move. Smoothly. Silently. And place the napkin exactly where it must go. The king dabs. Briefly. Twice. The pastry arrives. Applause follows, not for you, of course, but for the dessert presentation. Still, Lefranc nods once, and that's more satisfying than all the flattery of court. Later, as the sun slinks toward the forest, Lefranc brings you to the napkin vault. Yes, there's a vault. Inside, behind a wall that looks like mere wood paneling, lie the most sacred linen artifacts of Versailles, the napkin used at the king's coronation feast. The one embroidered by a blind nun during a solar eclipse. The napkin once folded by Molière himself, who reportedly used it to rehearse comic gestures before debuting a new play. One is shaped like a rose. Another bears the faint trace of powdered sugar, untouched since the Grand Macaron incident of 1667. Historians still argue whether that sugar stain was deliberate, perhaps a subtle critique of taxation through dessert, or simply the result of a clumsy duke with a sweet tooth. You ask if the vault ever opens to the public. Lefranc doesn't laugh, but he does permit himself a brief nasal exhale. The linens outlive us all, he says. That night, your dreams are made of creases and candles. The king dabs endlessly, and you fold forever. You wake up oddly content, you now possess what the servants call la main tranquille, the steady hand. It's not something you earn with rank or memorize from a scroll. It's the reflex of someone who stood 10 feet from the Sun King while holding a monogrammed napkin and didn't tremble. Your next task is quieter but no less crucial: archival rotation. See, the napkins of Louis XIV don't simply get washed. They are evaluated, documented, and, if significant, retired with dignity. Yes. Some napkins retire. You find yourself in a little-known chamber just off the eastern wing, known as the Drapery of Events. A long, dry room, dimly lit, and lined with flat wooden drawers stacked floor to ceiling. This is where napkins go to be remembered. Your guide is a hunched old woman named Beatrice. She walks with the solemnity of a priest and smells faintly of lavender starch. Her job is to assign narrative weight to cloth. This one, she says, opening drawer 219, was held by the king when he learned of the Great Fire of London. He dropped it. Stained it with burgundy. No one dared touch it for 6 hours. You nod. Another drawer contains the napkin used during the Queen's rumored fainting spell. Another, from the banquet where the king's mistress accidentally referred to the Dauphin as the wrong Louis. Each napkin is pressed between layers of parchment, annotated in 3 languages, and ranked on a scale of 1 to 5 based on its historical perspiration imprint. You blink at that one. Beatrice shrugs. Sweat tells stories, she says. Ask a scribe. Or a spy. You're tasked with preparing a retirement record for Napkin 9C, a cloth used on the day the king made peace with the Bishop of Paris. It has a nearly invisible ink blot in one corner, the result of a signing gesture gone awry. You note the time, the context, the room's temperature, the seating arrangement, and, critically, the emotional texture of the moment, tense but tender, with cinnamon overtones. Historians still argue whether this reconciliation napkin was truly used for dabbing or simply placed as decoration. Some fringe scholars propose it was used by the bishop himself, who was seated closer than protocol allowed. The truth? No one knows. But the blot remains. Later, Beatrice invites you to witness a napkin interment, a rare ritual where retired linens are symbolically folded one last time and placed in their forever drawer, with a sprig of thyme and a pinch of salt. It's more moving than you expect. As you return through the palace corridors, the daily din of Versailles seems oddly louder: satin shoes, murmured gossip, the slap of distant cards on velvet. But beneath it all is a quieter pulse, the hush of fabric, the whisper of folds, the hum of linen carrying centuries of unspoken dramas. You pass a valet polishing a golden soup ladle and realize, he hasn't even noticed the napkin tucked beneath it. A beginner's mistake. You correct it. And for that moment, just that moment, you feel like Versailles breathes with you. Some days at Versailles are opulent. Others are utterly absurd. Today is the King's Hunting Recovery Banquet, an event as elaborate as the hunt itself, but with fewer deer and more roast pheasant. The menu has been decided, the musicians rehearsed, and the guest list finalized, down to the third cousins of passing diplomats. But a storm has knocked out the linen delivery from Paris. You are, as the saying goes, napkinless. The entire servant quarter is in panic. Footmen dart like startled starlings. Cooks scream into basins of broth. Someone faints near the caramel pears. You, however, are summoned to join a secret operation known only by its codename, the reserve drawer. Hidden behind a false bookshelf in the royal tailor's office is a narrow corridor that leads, eventually, to a climate-controlled room that no one's supposed to know about. Inside are boxes labeled with ominous words: only if fire, not during Lent, experimental weaves. And then, finally, for unanticipated feasting. Inside are napkins. Dozens of them. But they are all wrong. Some are from the previous regime. Others are mismatched. One has a Portuguese crest, another smells faintly of gunpowder, and one has a pattern of dancing goats that looks suspiciously pagan. Still, they are better than nothing. You and 3 other trusted linen bearers are given the go-ahead. You clean them, steam them, and begin the rapid folding known as l'éclair plie, the lightning fold. Your wrists ache, your back spasms, your fingertips turn raw from edge tucking. But somehow, before the first pheasant lands on a plate, every setting has a napkin. Crisis narrowly averted. Almost. Because seated at the far end of the table is a visiting Dutch countess. She lifts her napkin delicately, blinks, and smiles. Is this Indonesian cotton? You freeze. She's not angry. In fact, she seems delighted. But it's a problem. That cloth was part of a shipment originally diverted during a maritime embargo. Technically, it shouldn't exist in the palace, at least not in public. Historians still debate whether this particular banquet was the origin of the so-called Java linen incident, which led to quiet inquiries by 3 embassies and a series of coded notes passed via lemon rinds. For now, though, you nod and say, "Indeed, my lady. A rare weave. Reserved for rain-blessed occasions." She laughs. The meal continues. Afterwards, as the guests retire and the empty plates are carted off, you inspect the napkins for signs of misuse. Some are folded nicely. Others are crumpled like battlefield banners. One has been tied into a makeshift dog collar. But all are accounted for. You return them to the linen room, tuck them behind the parchment-pressed archives, and label the bundle, used under storm duress, avoid until 1700. It's nearly midnight when you finally sit, your legs aching, your hands tingling from citrus oils and ash soap. A junior valet hands you a bowl of leftover soup and a crust of bread. "You saved dinner," he says, half serious. You chew slowly, staring at your calloused fingers. You're not just folding napkins anymore. Your folding time, dawn at Versailles, arrives not with birdsong, but with the groan of polished carts and the whispers of brushstroke smoothing powdered cheeks. You, however, wake to the sound of cloth being refolded, again. There's been an incident. Apparently, one of the Duke of Maine's valets dared to use a royal napkin to mop up a bit of spilled wine. A red wine. From Bordeaux. During breakfast. You're called in for consultation. By now, your reputation precedes you. Not quite fame, but close. In the whisper network of linen handlers, you're referred to as Louis XIV, the smoother. It's not clear if that refers to fabric or scandal. Probably both. You arrive at the scene, a side salon with brocade drapes, an overturned candelabra, and a visibly panicking valet holding a napkin that looks like it lost a duel. The wine stain resembles a map of southern France. You inspect the cloth. The embroidery confirms it. This was one of the king's favored breakfast napkins, known for its unusually high thread count and subtle scent of bergamot. You nod gravely. "There's only one option," you say. The valet gulps. "Wash it?" "No," you whisper. "We fake a twin." You enlist your most trusted folding partner, Henriette, who has an eye for patterns and a knack for forging monograms. Together, you locate a near match from the 1668 drawer and begin the transformation, stitching, scenting, even artificially aging the corners with a firelit spoon and a splash of lemon. By midday, the replacement is ready. You slide it back into the king's napkin rotation like nothing ever happened. Historians still argue whether the king ever noticed the switch. Some claim he sniffed once, paused, and said, "Lavender," while others insist he merely dabbed, sighed, and asked for more apricots. Regardless, the valet is spared. Just barely. And you? You're approached later that day by Madame de Montespan herself. "I hear you can restore cloth," she says, arching a brow. "Can you also restore reputations?" You manage a polite laugh, though you're not sure whether she's joking. She's not. She brings you into a side chamber, where a small pile of embroidered handkerchiefs sits beneath a locked box. She opens it. Inside, letters. Love letters. From someone whose name you don't dare read too closely. "The ink bleeds," she says, handing you one. "I need them preserved. Smoothed. Folded." And suddenly, you're no longer just a napkin handler. You're a steward of secrets. That night, you work under candlelight, your fingers gliding across linen soaked in perfume and whispers. You dry tears that aren't yours, press folds that have held more emotion than silk has any right to. You think, this wasn't in the job description. But neither was anything else. And as the moon rises over the gilded edge of Versailles, you fold one last handkerchief and tuck it beneath the others. It smells faintly of rosewater, and regret, your hands now carry a kind of power. Not the kind that wields swords or stamps edicts, but the softer kind, the kind that folds scandal into silk and tucks treason between hems. Word spreads quickly. Not among the nobility, no. They're too distracted by wigs and lace. But within the shadowy maze of Versailles servants, you've become a legend. They say you once removed a mustard stain using only a sigh. That you can tell a man's sins by the way he crumples cloth. One cook swears you smoothed a napkin so perfectly it erased a love affair from memory. This is not entirely true. But today, truth is more tangled than usual. A minor noble from Provence, young, awkward, and recently promoted, has brought a gift napkin to present to the king at lunch. It's a tradition only observed by regional lords desperately seeking relevance. Unfortunately, the napkin is hideous. Thick, uneven linen. Bright orange thread. The family crest stitched with a rooster that looks vaguely nauseated. Worst of all, it smells like goat cheese. And yet, it has to be accepted. Royal protocol dictates that a gift, once offered, must not be refused, at least not openly. Which means the king must be seen using it, at least once, before it's quietly misplaced or accidentally catches fire near a wax sconce. So here you are, tasked with integrating this orange insult into the royal place setting. You devise a plan. During the lunch, you slip the napkin into rotation just before the third course, when the king is most distracted by duck pâté and state gossip. You fold it into a papillon despoir, a rare flourish designed to resemble a hopeful butterfly, which will at least give the rooster a fighting chance at redemption. The king picks it up. Pauses. Sniffs once. Historians still argue whether he chuckled, sighed, or simply dabbed his mouth and moved on. Some say he whispered, "Peasant poultry," and continued eating. Others claim he nodded respectfully toward the noble and mouthed the word "bold." What's certain is this: by dessert, the napkin is gone. And no one knows where. Not even you. That evening, you retrace every step. Nothing. You ask Beatrice. She hasn't seen it. You check the linen bins, the hidden drawers, even behind the tapestry where a rogue raccoon was once spotted. And then, in the quiet of the West Wing's gallery, you find it. Folded neatly. Placed atop a marble bust of Apollo. No note. No sign. Just the napkin, its rooster oddly proud in the moonlight. You don't know who placed it there. Maybe it was the king himself. Maybe one of the palace's secret historians. Or maybe, just maybe, it climbed up there on its own, like a misplaced joke hoping to become a legend. You smooth it once more. This time, gently. Then leave it where it rests. After all, not all mistakes need erasing. Some, with the right fold, can become stories. By now, you've become fluent in the secret language of linen. You can read a napkin like a novel. This crease? Panic during soup. That stain? A flustered toast gone wrong. That deliberate fold into quarters? A love signal from a duchess to the cardinal's secretary. Yes, at Versailles, even napkins flirt. This morning, though, you're summoned to a more peculiar task: inventory review. A quarterly ordeal meant to appease the royal treasurer, who believes, foolishly, that if he counts the napkins often enough, the palace will stop bleeding fabric. He has never seen the look of terror on a kitchen boy's face after accidentally burning a hem with a hot copper spoon. You report to the Grand Linen Archive, an echoing chamber below the servants' dormitories. It smells like starch, thyme, and possibly mushrooms. Inside, drawers upon drawers of napkins, sorted by weave, size, date of royal contact, and degree of historical relevance. You're joined by Claude, the assistant to the under-steward of cloth, not a glamorous title, but he wears it with pride and owns 7 clipboards. Together, you begin counting. Folding. Smoothing. Tagging. All is going well until you reach drawer 87C, miscellaneous, possibly Portuguese. You open it and pause. Inside are napkins you've never seen. Coarser. Dyed in unusual shades, deep maroons, forest greens, almost earthy tones that feel pre-modern. One bears a stitched sun with 3 eyes. Another is inscribed with something that might be a curse or just a badly translated proverb. Claude squints. These aren't on the master list. You nod slowly. Which means they're important. Historians still argue about the origin of the 87C set. Some claim they were gifts from a Moroccan envoy who disappeared after a 3-day chess game with a bishop. Others say they're from a secret society of linen philosophers who believed cloth carried memory. Regardless, you decide to do what all good linen archivists do, make a new label. 87C, Legacy Textiles, do not fold without whispering first. Just in case. The real trouble begins when a minor court poet stumbles upon one of these napkins and declares it a divine muse. He starts writing odes to it. Passionate, confusing odes with titles like Fold Me Once, My Heart Unravels and Beneath the Crease, I Found My Name. Soon, other nobles start requesting 87C napkins for their table settings, hoping, perhaps, that inspiration will bleed through the fibers. You now have a dilemma. These napkins aren't food safe. They've never been laundered properly. One might be made of ground bark. But denying a poet's muse risks starting an artistic rebellion, and you've already dodged 2 social uprisings this week. So, you compromise. Each evening, before dinner, you select one muse napkin to place discreetly near the poet's place. Folded in a style you invent yourself, la plume cachée, the hidden quill. He writes 3 more odes and, mercifully, moves on to admiring a chair leg that reminds him of fate. Still, you keep the drawer labeled, sealed, and marked with a soft pencil note, not for ordinary wiping. Because at Versailles, even the napkins have secrets. Versailles is swelling with visitors today. A delegation from Sweden has arrived, bringing with them powdered wigs taller than most chandeliers and a gift that, frankly, no one expected, an entire crate of northern birch bark napkins. Yes. Bark. Apparently, in their region, the tradition is to carve poetic blessings into thin birch slices and present them at state dinners. The Swedish ambassador beams as he holds up one of these curious objects, reading aloud an inscription that, according to his translator, roughly means, "May your duck be juicy and your enemies meek." You're asked to help integrate the bark. So, you find yourself standing in the main linen hall, surrounded by curious servants holding what looks like the result of a failed tree carving contest. You try folding one and it cracks. You try softening another with warm cloth, no luck. These are not napkins, they're wooden pamphlets. You decide to repurpose. By mid-afternoon, you've turned the Swedish birch napkins into placeholders. Using melted candle wax, you affix a French name card to each piece, then nestle them into the place settings like personalized welcome shields. The king arrives late to dinner, his mood unreadable. He lifts a bark napkin, squints at the Nordic lettering, and raises one brow. Historians still argue whether he whispered, remarkably rustic, or simply blinked twice and continued to the soup course. Some swear he attempted to fold one in half and gave up midway, instead using it as a toothpick rest. The nobles murmur with delight at the foreign oddity. By the time dessert arrives, 3 courtiers have tried carving their initials into the bark with dinner knives. You, meanwhile, return to the linen vault for a breather and are met with yet another absurdity. A request. From none other than the Marquise de Crambon, a notorious fashion eccentric, who insists that from now on, her personal napkins must match her daily mood, described in elaborate watercolor charts. Monday is wistful lavender. Wednesday is murderous plum. Friday, existential mauve. You try to explain that linens don't come in existential. She does not care. And so, a new routine is born. Each morning, you await a scrolled delivery of the Marquise's mood palette, then rush to the dyers, praying they can blend sardonic beige before the midday meal. Once, you accidentally delivered a melancholy teal when she'd ordered ambitiously crushed blue. She threw a peach at a mirror. Still, you manage. Versailles trains you not only in diplomacy, but chromatic psychology. You begin to anticipate moods by footstep sounds alone. Quick taps equals impish gold. Heavy trudges equals despairing slate. One day, she sends you a blank scroll with a single word, transparent. You leave her seat empty. She sends back a note, perfect. It's the closest thing to a compliment you've received in weeks. That night, as you fold the last of the usable napkins, you consider how odd your job has become. You've stitched false emblems, negotiated with poets, categorized bark, and matched napkins to emotion. And still, the king dines, unbothered. The servants whisper. The court pulses forward. And you? You fold. And fold. And fold again. Because some people pray with beads. And others, fold linen. By this point, your fingers could fold linen in your sleep. And sometimes they do. You've woken more than once to find a napkin tucked into your blanket corner, expertly creased into a miniature fleur-de-lis. This morning, though, no such grace awaits. A new complication has unfolded, quite literally. The king has announced a special event, le dîner d'ombres, the dinner of shadows. A private midnight meal in candlelight, designed, he says, to evoke mystery, melancholy, and mild indigestion. And every single item must be black. Black glassware. Black silver. Black food, somehow. And, of course, black napkins. There's only one problem. You do not have black napkins. You have cream. Ecru. Slightly sallow beige. And one, almost gray, set that was ruined in a cider accident. Panic trickles through the linen department like spilled ink. You're told to improvise. So you do. You begin dyeing. First with crushed berries, too purple. Then squid ink, effective, but it smells like betrayal. Finally, you find success in a concoction of soot, vinegar, and the kind of dark fabric dye that's normally reserved for theatrical morning wigs. The result is passable. Not true black, but a moody charcoal that whispers, "I have seen things." Still, you need to dry them quickly. There's no time for the usual line drying in the courtyard. You sneak into the royal bakery and lay the napkins atop still warm oven stones. It works. Almost. One napkin catches fire. Tiny fire. Easily extinguished. But the scorch mark is shaped exactly like a goat. You decide to keep it. Tuck it into your pocket. Just in case it means something. The dinner begins at midnight. The king enters wearing a robe so black it reflects the candlelight in silken glints. The guests murmur softly, their powdered wigs casting exaggerated shadows on the walls. The whole scene feels like a play where no one remembers their lines. You watch from the sidelines as the guests unfold their napkins with a kind of reverent curiosity. Historians still argue whether the queen whispered, "Are we attending a meal or summoning spirits?" or if she simply sneezed and blamed the darkness. Some guests dab their lips. Others use their napkins as shawls. One insists on tying his into a blindfold, claiming it enhances the flavor of roasted pigeon. No one notices that the Count of Mirbeau's napkin is slightly scorched. No one but you. And the goat? Still visible. You begin to wonder, softly, sleepily, if Versailles is playing tricks on you. If napkins can whisper. If fire can speak. If linen remembers. Later that night, you find a folded note under your door. Inside is one of your black napkins, refolded perfectly into the silhouette of a raven. No signature. No wax seal. Just 2 words, embroidered faintly in thread. More soon. You sleep with the candle on. The next morning, you half expect to find the napkin gone. Stolen away by candlelight or whisked off by some secret society of raven-folding saboteurs. But it's still there. Still watching you. You place it gently in your satchel, next to yesterday's scorched goat. 2 mysterious napkins in 1 week, your linen logbook is getting stranger by the day. Just as you're debating whether to mention it to Claude, you're summoned, urgently. Not to the kitchens. Not to the laundry. But to the king's personal valet. A rare and unnerving summons. You follow the corridor past polished mirrors and silent marble statues. The valet greets you with a nod and gestures to a door just ajar. Inside, the king's chamber is dimly lit, the curtains drawn tight against the morning sun. On a small side table lies chaos. Half-folded napkins. Twisted linen. Ribbons. A spoon? Apparently, the king has attempted to fold a napkin on his own. The horror. According to the valet, His Majesty had insisted on surprising his dinner guests by creating an original fold to commemorate the Battle of the Dunes. The result looks more like the aftermath of a startled squid. You're asked to translate the vision. Gently, respectfully, you unfold the linen disaster and start anew. You coax the fabric into a ridged triangle, then pinch the edges upward until it resembles something vaguely dune-like. You tuck the spoon in as a flagpole, for whimsy. The valet nods, impressed. He'll call it Le Triomphe du Sable. Later that afternoon, you receive a note from the royal art tutor asking for a copy of the design for his miniature linen sculpture class. You are, somehow, now a napkin artist. That evening's dinner is a triumph. Nobles exclaim over the folds. One says it reminds him of war. Another says it looks like a seashell. The king beams, basking in their confusion. Historians still argue whether he truly understood the fold or just liked the spoon. Meanwhile, you're pulled aside by Madame Fragonard, mistress of the royal musicians. She's breathless. Her violinist has composed a 6-minute sonata inspired by your raven-shaped napkin from the night before. She insists you hear it. You sit, politely, as the piece is played, 6 soft, winding minutes of violin trills, echoing candle drips, and something that might be a whispering wind. It's beautiful. Sleepy. Confusing. Like folding a dream. You clap gently. She seems pleased. And then, another message. This one embroidered into the hem of a fresh white napkin, delivered by a footman who refuses to say from whom. It reads, simply, "The owl waits." You stare at it for a long moment. Something is happening at Versailles. Something beyond linens and forks and powdered wigs. You are not just folding napkins anymore. You are being folded into something. A pattern. A plan. You smooth the owl napkin flat and refold it. This time, into wings, you begin watching the shadows. Not out of fear, necessarily, but out of a growing suspicion that Versailles has turned into something more than a palace. It feels, lately, like a theater where the audience doesn't realize they're also actors. And you? Somewhere between stagehand and playwright. Your next assignment arrives not by scroll or shout, but in silence. At breakfast, tucked into the folds of the king's toast napkin, a special set reserved for informal crumb-catching occasions, is a small sprig of thyme. Nothing else. You pause. Thyme is not typically part of napkin service, unless someone's confused their seasoning duties with laundry. You pocket it, unsure. Minutes later, a cook passes you in the corridor and mutters, when the clock chimes 13, "Go to the tapestry room." Versailles only has 12 hours. There is no 13. Still, you understand. That evening, just after the final dinner service, the great hall clock briefly halts. Then clicks forward. One extra chime. Subtle. Intentional. You slip away. The tapestry room is quiet, lit only by the moon filtering through high windows. The great woven walls flutter slightly, despite the stillness. And on a small table, beneath a covering cloth, is a stack of napkins, your napkins, but folded in ways you never learned. An owl. A raven. A goat. A hand. A mirror. Each one stitched at the hem with a different date. One is tomorrow. You hear a sound behind you. A light footfall. A sigh. It's Madame de Crambon, the mood napkin marquise. She doesn't speak right away. Just runs her fingers over the goat-shaped napkin and nods slightly, as if confirming a rumor only she heard. You've been invited, she says at last. To the gathering. You blink. Which gathering? The one Versailles denies. Before you can reply, she presses something into your hand, a folded black napkin with a tiny silver bell stitched into the corner. Wear this at midnight, she whispers, and fold nothing. You leave the room unsure if you've just been recruited into a secret society, or demoted into prop handling. Still, you follow instructions. That night, you wear the napkin. Tied like a sash. No folding. No questions. You are led, silently, to the Queen's neglected garden. A place no one visits anymore, overgrown with ivy and rumors. And there, among the ruined fountains, are 7 others, each wearing a napkin in a different fold. A duck. A candle. A serpent. A tower. A tooth. A fork. A hand. You are the bell. No one speaks. Instead, one by one, they begin to lay napkins down around the base of a broken statue, once Hercules, now moss-covered and wingless. With each napkin placed, a servant recites a single sentence. To the tooth of history. To the crease of truth. To the fold that folds us all. Then, silence. And then, they leave. Just like that. No explanations. No passwords. No invitations to next week's linen rave. Just mystery, and moss, and the soft toll of the midnight bell stitched into your hip. You walk back through the corridors of Versailles, unsure if what you witnessed was ritual, rebellion, or really elaborate sleepwalking. Historians still argue whether the so-called folded society of Versailles was real, or simply the fevered dreams of overworked laundresses. But you remember. The napkin shapes. The symbols. The time. And the quiet thrill of being seen. Later, alone, you unfold your napkin. Inside, hidden in a crease, is a press-time leaf. On it, in faded ink. Next time, bring scissors. You laugh. Softly. Sleepily, the scissors are smuggled in the only way one can smuggle scissors in Versailles, inside a loaf of bread. You enlist Claude for this delicate task. He is baffled, but loyal. Is it treason if I ask why you need them? He whispers. Only if I answer, you reply, deadpan. By now, your days and nights have blurred into a dreamy rhythm of folded linens, whispered codes, and increasingly symbolic vegetables. The king's lunch napkin is folded like a swan. The queen's breakfast napkin has been requested in the shape of a key. And the dauphin refuses to use any napkin that hasn't been blessed by the royal dog. These are, somehow, the easier parts of your job. Because your mind is elsewhere, on that time-leaf message. On what might require scissors. And on the peculiar new tension humming through the palace like a harpsichord left slightly out of tune. At exactly 3 bells past sunset, you find yourself summoned again, this time by a note inside a hollowed-out wheel of cheese. It simply reads, North Library. Behind the tapestry. Cut carefully. You oblige. The scissors are small, sharp, and unsettlingly delicate. As you snip through the edge seam of the tapestry, a corner lifts to reveal a staircase so narrow it feels designed for secrets. You descend. Below the library, the stone corridor opens into a chamber lit by oil lamps and candles shaped like folded napkins. There's even one wax raven, its wings just beginning to melt at the tips. 8 figures wait in silence. Each wears a linen mask folded into different mythic beasts, phoenix, griffin, basilisk. You recognize none of them. Except the goat. She, or he, you can't quite tell, gestures for you to approach a long wooden table. On it lies an enormous map, hand-stitched, ancient, and annotated in the margins with napkin folds. You stare. It's Versailles. But, not. Hidden compartments. Forgotten halls. symbols you recognize from your most ambitious table settings. And at the center, the king's chamber, marked not with a crown, but a hand-drawn spoon. You almost laugh. But no one else does. The goat speaks. Napkins are language. Folds are verbs. We've been writing a second history. One only linen can carry. You nod, because what else is there to do? They assign you a task, to recreate an ancient fold known as la boucle du temps, the loop of time. A design lost since the reign of Charles IX. Supposedly, the fold unlocks not a door, but a memory. Yours? The palace's? No one says. You are given fabric, candlelight, silence. You fold. It takes hours. Your hands ache. Your eyes blur. At one point, you swear the linen resists you, curling against your fingers, folding the wrong way, whispering in seams. But you persist. And finally, as the final corner tucks in, the napkin shudders. Yes. Shudders. And then, you're elsewhere. Not in the linen chamber. Not in the palace. But in a sun-drenched courtyard, 40 years in the past. You are watching a young version of the king. Barefoot. Laughing. Tossing a napkin in the air like a child with no throne, no wars, no powdered expectations. And next to him, a servant girl folding that very same napkin into a daisy. She looks like you. But not. Historians still argue whether linen can hold memory, or if this was simply your mind unraveling after too much starch and not enough sleep. But when you return, back in the candlelit chamber, the goat folds the daisy-shaped napkin into your pocket and nods. Now you've seen what Versailles forgets. No one claps. No one speaks. They just vanish, one by one, into side doors you never saw until now. You are alone. And a little afraid. And strangely honored. You leave through a different tunnel, one that spills you out into the herb garden just as dawn breaks. Claude finds you moments later, holding a napkin shaped like time, with daisy petals folded into infinity. He says nothing. Just hands you tea. You sip it slowly, the way one might sip a secret. The palace is quieter now. Or maybe you are. After everything, the hidden chambers, the raven folds, the scissors in the bread, you've stopped wondering whether Versailles is a real place. It feels more like a story that's still being written. With linen. And time. And crumbs that spell messages when no one's looking. You wake up before sunrise, no longer needing the kitchen bell to stir you. Your fingers already move in folding rhythms, even in sleep. You find yourself folding napkins for no one, draping phantom swans across your pillow, tucking daisy loops under your sleeve. And still, the palace demands more. Today, a new challenge. A foreign ambassador is visiting. His Excellency, the Marquis of Norland, a man reportedly allergic to silver, frightened by porcelain, and passionately superstitious about left-facing folds. Naturally, you're tasked with his dinner linens. You arrive at the dining hall hours early, armed with flaxen napkins hand-spun by the Queen's traveling nuns and starched to within an inch of sentience. You begin to fold, not one napkin, but 4. Layered atop each other. A protective sequence. Like spells, if you believed in that sort of thing. Which you didn't. Until about 2 nights ago. The result is beautiful. You don't fold a dove. Or a fish. Or a daisy. You fold a labyrinth. Soft corners turning inward, guiding the eye to a single center knot. The ambassador arrives, sniffs the air suspiciously, and sits. When he sees your fold, he pauses. Places one hand over his heart. And, very softly, whispers, "My grandmother folded like this." He eats in silence. Smiling. Not once does he use the napkin. Which, oddly, you expected. After the meal, the king compliments the fold. He does not ask how you learned it. He just says, some things should stay forgotten. Until they're not. And with that cryptic endorsement, you are promoted. To what, exactly, no one specifies. You still report to the linen master. But now your napkins are sometimes sent directly to the royal scribe for cataloguing. A few have been framed. One, you hear, is traveling with the Dauphin's hunting party as a lucky talisman. Your nights change, too. You're called less often to dinners, and more often to occasions. Events that don't exist on any calendar. At hours that stretch the meaning of night. One evening, a servant leads you into the king's bedchamber, empty and echoing. There's a single napkin on the floor, folded in the shape of a closed eye. You kneel. Carefully unfold it. Inside, nothing. And yet everything changes. Because you understand. The fold was never about linen. It was about permission. That night, you take your old raven napkin from your drawer. You refold it, not as you once did, with tight pride and neat corners, but loosely. Softly. Letting it breathe. And for the first time, you place it not on a table, but on your own pillow. Versailles hums outside your window. History may not remember your name. But it remembers your hands. They moved quietly through the palace, shaping the forgotten, folding the unspoken. And the napkins? They remember everything, now, everything softens. You ease out of the folds and chambers of Versailles, like silk slipping through fingers. The rustle of linen fades into the hush of midnight corridors. The flicker of candlelight dims behind closed eyelids. Outside, the gardens exhale. The fountains dream. Even the tapestries seem to relax their weave. And you, stillness wraps around you like a napkin folded just right. No creases of worry. No corners sharp with thought. There's nothing more to arrange. Nothing more to polish. You've done enough. You can leave the forks wherever they landed. You can let the swans sleep. And if some forgotten servant, centuries from now, finds a napkin folded into the shape of a labyrinth tucked behind a wall or slipped beneath a pillow, well, maybe they'll smile. Maybe they'll wonder. Maybe they'll dream. Because history isn't always carved into stone or etched in gold. Sometimes, it's tucked inside linen. Whispered through thread. Pressed between folds where only the quietest hands can reach. So let your breath slow. Let your thoughts unfold. The palace fades. The night deepens. And you are exactly where you need to be. Still. Warm. Dreaming.